All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started while final folks are logging in. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Caroline Bushnell, Associate Director of Corporate Engagement at the Good Food Institute. Welcome to our webinar on plant-based strategies for retail. By the end of today's session, we hope you'll have a deeper understanding of the best assortment, marketing, and merchandising tactics to grow plant-based sales and thus total store sales. Before we dive in, I'd like to go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, we will send a recording of the presentation to all registered attendees. And second, all speakers will be available to answer questions during the last 15 minutes. You'll see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit questions at any time during the webinar, and we will begin answering them at the end of the presentation. We may answer some of the simple ones directly in the chat as we go. So here's an overview of what we'll cover today. First, I'll introduce GFI and provide a brief overview of the plant-based market. Then I'll turn it over to Emma Ignashevsky, our strategist, who will share results and insights from the Good Food Retail Report. Next, we'll be joined by Parker Brody, Senior Global Category Manager at Whole Foods Market, to discuss some insights from their well-developed plant-based business. And finally, Kyle Gahn, our research analyst, will share sales data and consumer insights on plant-based food performance throughout COVID. For those not yet familiar with our organization, the Good Food Institute is a nonprofit 501c3 that is dedicated to accelerating the shift to a sustainable, healthy, and just food system. We are funded by philanthropy and have earned GuideStar's Platinum Seal of Transparency, an honor obtained by less than 1% of nonprofits. Our organization employs over 90 staff around the globe with 3 key programmatic departments. In science and technology, our team of PhD scientists work to advance and open source the foundational science of alternative proteins. Our corporate engagement team builds relationships with the world's largest food manufacturers, meat companies, restaurants, and retailers to help them capitalize on opportunities in alternative proteins. We also provide support to industry entrepreneurs and startups, as well as investors and financial institutions. And finally, our policy team advocates for fair regulation of plant-based and cultivated meat and lobbies for government investment in sustainable protein R&D. The key question we're really working to address is how will we feed almost 10 billion people by 2050 and do so sustainably, efficiently, and safely? We know that industrial animal agriculture is responsible for almost 15% of global GHG emissions. It uses 75% of our agricultural land, yet provides only 33% of the global protein supply. And it is the #1 user of medically important antibiotics. We can't do it with this existing food system. And we believe the answer is to make the meat, egg, and dairy products that people love in a more sustainable and efficient way, using alternative proteins. We can make protein directly from plants with fermentation technology or using animal cell culture. We'll be focusing on plant-based for today's presentation, but it's worth noting that fermentation is increasingly being used as an enabling technology for the alternative protein industry. And then there is cultivated meat, also known as cell-based or cultured meat, which is made by growing animal cells outside of the animal. So now let's look at a brief overview of the plant-based market and its evolution to today. So why now? It's the first question I usually get. Why all of this hype and focus when some of these plant-based products have been around for decades? Well, up until quite recently, when consumers thought of plant-based food, the photos on the left here, hippies, sprouts, unseasoned tofu, may have been what came to mind. What we'll call plant-based 1.0, or more accurately, veggie. These products were intended for consumers with a vegan or vegetarian lifestyle. But today, plant-based looks very different. What we'll call plant-based 2.0 is driven by innovative, tasty products that are made to satisfy meat eaters. These products aren't being marketed to one specific lifestyle, and they are laser focused on competing on taste, the #1 driver of consumer choice. And central to plant-based 2.0 is the idea that meat doesn't have to be from an animal, dairy doesn't have to be from a cow. These next generation companies are breaking meat down into its component parts and recreating each component from a plant source. Instead of cycling plants through animals to transform them into meat, why not make meat directly from plants? And in effect, these companies are revolutionizing the idea of what meat and dairy are, which is clear in the terminology plant-based meat and plant-based milk. It's a very different framing than calling them substitutes, which is how the category had referred to these products for decades. And companies are no longer just targeting the small niche of vegans and vegetarians, which make up just 6% of the US population. Instead, they are looking at both omnivores and flexitarians as their consumer market, which, as you can see here, is clearly a much, much larger market. And along with the recent innovation in plant-based foods, we're seeing shifting consumer needs, which are propelling this category forward. A recent Aramark survey shows 60% of consumers want to reduce their meat consumption. And according to Ipsos, 54% of consumers say they are trying to consume less animal-based foods and more plant-based foods. Thinking about where this market is headed, it's important to note just how engaged millennials and Gen X are in the plant-based category. Millennials, who are poised to become the largest generation, but also Gen X, eat a lot of meat alternatives and over-index for category sales, driving 67% of the volume. According to Mintel data, 79% of millennials eat meat alternatives, with 30% eating them every day, half a few times per week, and over 1/3 saying they plan to buy more. And Gen Z isn't even featured on here, as they are just coming into their purchasing power. But they have the largest rate of vegetarianism of any generation. Data has also shown that millennial parents purchase plant-based meat even more frequently than other millennials. So there's a whole new generation being raised on these products. We also know that the plant-based shopper is valuable, with a basket worth 61% more than the average shopper. So is this a real trend or just a fad? Well, when you look at product launches over time, you can see a steady growth in launches across the globe. This steady growth across multiple regions is a key indicator that this is a lasting consumer shift versus a fad, which generally comes out of nowhere and is fairly limited in regional scope. And meat companies, who are increasingly referring to themselves as protein companies, clearly see the opportunity. As you can see here, 6 of the top US meat companies are active in alternative proteins. And in fact, the CEO of Maple Leaf Foods, which is Canada's largest meat producer, referring to plant-based, said, "We fully expect this is where the majority of the growth will reside in the future." And the capital flowing into plant-based food companies has been steadily increasing, with 2020 being a particularly active year. Through just August of this year, the amount of capital raised is already more than double the amount raised in the entirety of 2019, highlighting growing investor interest and confidence in plant-based foods and alternative proteins. Here, we've aggregated various analyst projections on the plant-based meat market 10 to 15 years out. You can see a pretty broad range of estimates, but the average seems to be that plant-based meat will have around 10% share of the total meat market by 2030. UBS is the most conservative at $85 billion globally with 6% share, and A.T. Kearney is by far the most bullish at $370 billion globally with 23% share. The US estimates project between 4 to 12% market share by 2029 or 2030, with the total market value in the range of $12 to $41 billion, with Wells Fargo's estimate being far on the conservative side compared to the others. So what exactly will we be discussing when we say plant-based foods throughout this presentation? Well, for the purpose of this report, plant-based products are defined as direct replacements for animal-based products, such as plant-based meat, seafood, eggs, and dairy. Inherently plant-based foods, such as kale and chickpeas, are not included. We also have not included B2B ingredient companies. But ultimately in the future, we won't see these 3 technologies as distinct industry segments, but rather as one large industry where we produce animal product alternatives across a spectrum, utilizing ingredients from one or more of these technologies. Some might be fully plant-based, some fully cultivated, And in the middle, we'll have a large and growing segment that are hybrids, using plant ingredients, ingredients from fermentation, and even cultivated ingredients. For example, the Impossible Burger, which is plant-based, but uses fermentation to produce lehemoglobin, the signature ingredient that gives it a bloody appearance and meaty taste. And in the future, we might have a plant-based burger that uses cell-based or cultivated fat. So now, looking at retail sales data, we can see that at the end of 2019, the total plant-based food market was worth $5 billion after growing 11% from 2018. And since 2017, the plant-based food market has grown by over $1 billion, a 29% increase in just 2 years. Looking at plant-based food dollar sales by category, you can see that plant-based milk on the far left is the largest category with $2 billion in sales. One of the key factors that contributed to the rise of plant-based dairy is the in-store merchandising strategy that Silk pioneered, with plant-based milk being shelved in the refrigerated dairy case directly adjacent to cow's milk, thus introducing the category to many more consumers than its previous shelf-stable placement in the center of the store. Emma will be talking more about these types of strategies. And the other plant-based dairy products category is experiencing rapid growth, up 19% in 2019, as plant-based milk, a now common household staple, has introduced consumers to these other plant-based dairy categories like yogurt, cheese, and butter. Plant-based meat is the third largest category at about $940 million in sales, followed by meals, tofu and tempeh, condiments and dressings, and then plant-based eggs, a small but rapidly growing category, which grew 192% in 2019. And I'll add, while I don't have the exact number at present, I expect the plant-based meat category is at or around 1 billion by now. You'll notice here that tofu and tempeh is a small category with relatively low sales growth. So if we assume tofu and tempeh are more commonly eaten by vegetarians and vegans, this suggests that much of the volume of plant-based meat and other plant-based substitute categories may be driven by flexitarians and omnivores. IRI data from just prior to COVID showed that plant-based food sales were growing a full 14 times faster than total food sales, making them a key driver of retail sales growth. And Kyle will speak more to the impact of COVID on sales at retail shortly. This slide is really illustrative. Here, we compare the dollar sales growth of plant-based products to that of animal-based products across key categories over the past 2 years. The plant-based products are represented by the turquoise bars and the animal-based products by the dark gray bars. Across categories, plant-based product sales growth is significantly outpacing that of animal-based products, with all plant-based products having experienced double-digit sales growth over this time period. And in the most established plant-based category, milk, you can see that animal-based product sales are actually declining, down 4% over the past 2 years. Animal-based yogurt has also seen a significant decline of 6%. Considering household penetration, you can see plant-based milk is now purchased by just over 41% of US households, approaching the 1 in 2 mark. And this was an increase in 2019 of 1.4 points, or 3.5% more than the number of households in 2018. Plant-based meat comparatively is purchased by just 14% of households, but that was an increase of 1.1 points, or 8.5% over the number of households purchasing just the year prior. As far as dollar share of category, plant-based milk has 14% market share of the total milk category, while plant-based meat has just 1% share of the total meat category. Based on Nielsen data, the total retail meat category is worth approximately $95 billion. At $95 billion, each share point is worth around $950 million. If you assume that plant-based meat can reach the same share of market as plant-based milk over the next decade or so, which we believe indicators show that it can, that's a 13 share point gap. And the opportunity then to close that gap is worth $12 billion in US retail alone. And that's just the opportunity for one plant-based category. So with that overview, I'll now turn it over to Emma to discuss the Good Food Retail Report and strategies to help you capitalize on this opportunity.
Thanks, Caroline. Hi, everyone. I'm Emma Ignashevsky, and I'm going to cover the Good Food Retail Report. The report is a benchmarking in which GFI evaluated plant-based sales strategies at 23 banners owned by the largest US retailers. The 50-page report can be downloaded for free at gfi.org/retail-report. And today I'll be walking through some key findings and insights. To offer a quick overview for product assortment, we counted the number of unique SKUs on shelf in 11 plant-based meat, egg, and dairy categories. We also considered private label or store brand SKUs and the availability of plant-based options in prepared foods and food service. Merchandising considerations included the in-store location of categories, the use of aisle signage and shelf tags, and the use of recommended language like plant-based rather than vegan, which I'll expand upon in a bit. And marketing considerations included print and digital cross-category promotions. So not paid one-off advertising from a brand, but promotions of plant-based as a whole, whether print, digital, or in-store. The benchmarking consisted of store audits at multiple locations across regions for each of the 23 banners owned by the included retailers. We focused on 11 key product categories, and companies were audited and awarded at the banner level and offered the opportunity to provide data to improve the accuracy of scores ahead of publication. Each banner is rated on a scale of 1 to 5 stars in each of the 3 areas of product assortment, merchandising, and marketing. And we also synthesized those results into an overall rating, which you can find in the full report. Let's jump into product assortment. Our main recommendations to retailers in this area are that they, 1, stock a wide enough assortment to meet consumer demand and preferences across plant-based meat, egg, and dairy categories. 2, develop compelling private label products prioritized by the size, growth, and household penetration of the respective plant-based and animal-based categories. And 3, drive trial by giving customers a chance to sample professionally prepared dishes via retail food service and prepared foods. So when it comes down to it, if it's not on the shelf, merchandising and marketing won't matter. Almost 5,000 unique plant-based meat, egg, and dairy SKUs were sold last year at retailers in the US. It's a testament to the fact that consumers are looking for more plant-based diversity in product types. For meat, think plant-based beef, chicken, pork, and fish. For cheese, think mozzarella, cheddar, and brie. Consumers are also looking for format versatility. Burgers, yes, but also ground, sausages, nuggets, and shreds. We're also seeing more flavor profiles and unit sizes to complement a variety of eating styles and consumer desires for both novelty and for plant-based iterations of the dishes they know and love. When thinking about assortment, it's also critical to note the size and growth of animal-based categories, including those that have yet to experience extensive plant-based market disruption. We can see these opportunities when we consider plant-based household penetration. While refrigerated milk is in the fridge in 4 out of 10 US households, there is significant progress and opportunity in categories like meat, frozen meals, eggs, and other dairy. The time for having merely a couple plant-based burger patties on the shelf is over. Now, to compete for mainstream consumers looking for plant-based options, retailers need to offer 100 to 150 plus plant-based meat SKUs across refrigerated and frozen sections. Leading retailers also stock 380 plant-based dairy and egg SKUs. So overall, retailers may offer more than 530 total unique plant-based meat, egg, and dairy SKUs. By ensuring that private label lines include plant-based products, retailers can also capitalize on the mainstreaming of flexitarianism. Many retailers, including Walmart, Kroger, Albertsons, Ahold Delhaize, and Whole Foods Market, offer a variety of private label products across categories. Retailers who don't have at least one private label plant-based meat product should consider developing one that competes with conventional meat to satisfy the expansive omnivore market. Retailers with existing plant-based meat lines should continue to take advantage of its rising popularity by expanding to new product types. And plant-based meals, cheese, and yogurt are a few examples of notably underdeveloped categories in private label. We found that 70% of banners we benchmarked offered plant-based protein in prepared foods and food service, from Beyond Burgers at the Burger Bar to plant-based mac and cheese at the Hot Bar. And more than a third of banners featured plant-based meat specifically in at least one of fresh, deli, and prepared foods, grab and go, salad bar, hot bar, or restaurant-style food service sections. Let's see some examples of butcher and deli tactics. Wegmans launched random weight plant-based meat in the form of plant-based patties made with pea protein. According to GFI's SPINS market data, although plant-based meat accounts for 2% of all dollar sales for retail packaged meat, random weight plant-based meat is still an enormous white space. Bristol Farms added a series of meal prep products to its butcher section from Before the Butcher, including plant-based chicken burgers, taco mix, and chorizo stuffed peppers. Adding plant-based dishes to food service concepts can help attract new customers, raise check averages, and eliminate the veto vote from groups looking to eat together, public safety and health permitting, of course. Whole Foods Market won the award for prepared foods. Their breakfast sandwiches with Just Egg, Light Life Bacon, Gardein sausage, and Good Planet cheese are an example of a branded partnership that supports sample and trial, and ultimately that can lead to increased purchase at the shelf. Whole Foods also featured plant-based meat in their hot bar. With meal kit revenue doubling year over year, it's an area with activity from dedicated companies, restaurants, and grocery chains. Recently, Kroger announced a partnership with Impossible Foods that includes customizable swap outs for several Home Chef meal kit dishes, which is a simple but effective tactic to quickly expand customer choice. Moving towards digital, Wegmans Meals to Go app offers pickup and delivery via a partnership with DoorDash. It includes swap out options for plant-based cheese for build your own pizza. A few key takeaways in prepared foods and retail food service are to capitalize on trends, but also craft plant-based meals with tried and true center of plate concepts. Tap into growing categories like plant-based meat analogs that taste, cook, and sizzle like their animal-based counterparts. Take advantage of choice-based user interfaces, whether in person or digital, to offer easy swap outs, and leverage both own brand innovation and branded partnerships to inspire trial and drive on-shelf sales. Let's move on to merchandising. Key strategies in merchandising include shelving plant-based sets integrated or integrated segregated with the conventional set to make products more accessible to the mainstream shopper. We also recommend that retailers leverage plant-based aisle signage and shelf tags to communicate store location and product features. In GFI's 2019 study with MindLab on driving purchase intent for plant-based foods, plant-based and plant-based protein performed 15 to more than 20 percentage points higher than meatless or vegan on purchase intent. Using plant-forward language has the potential to really boost sales. We also recommend showcasing plant-based categories and end caps and special displays, particularly alongside analogous animal products. For most plant-based sets, we recommend an integrated segregated strategy to increase access for the majority of consumers. The benefits of this are clear. With integrated segregated merchandising, plant-based options are easily found in go-to areas. Plant-based and animal-based products are easily compared, and consumers are better able to appreciate the premium products and trade up. Importantly, 76% of all consumers say they prefer to shop for plant-based meat in the meat or frozen section, compared to only 24% who prefer the produce area. For categories with less developed portfolios, like eggs, for example, a fully integrated strategy may be a good option. We don't recommend a segregated strategy with plant-based products isolated from animal-based ones. It's all about empowering the consumer to make the choice. These merchandising tactics can substantially increase sales. After working with GFI to switch meat, dairy, frozen, and deli categories to integrated segregated merchandising, Heinen's saw dollar sales of plant-based foods increase 43% in the year ending February 2020 compared to the prior year. To boost trial, Heinen's also deployed their wellness team to host events like product tastings, cooking demos, and cart makeovers. Kroger also released results from a controlled study they ran with the Plant-Based Foods Association that found that plant-based meat sales grew 23% compared to control stores when the products were shelved in an integrated segregated set in the meat aisle. Here we can see some examples of aisle signage from King Soopers, Giant Food, and Heinen's. All of these implementations use the recommended plant-based language. And here are some additional examples of aisle signage and shelf tags from King Soopers, Target, and Sprouts. And note that Target has icons for both plant-based and vegan, which can be used additively to capture the attention of multiple consumer segments. These merchandising changes are part of a big picture shift. The meat department as we know it is transforming into a protein department, serving up conventional protein alongside plant-based protein and someday soon cultivated protein from the butcher counter to the packaged meat section. Our vision for a protein department of the future illustrates integrated segregated merchandising across product and protein type and repositions the meat department as a one-stop shop for all center of plate protein needs. In our benchmarking, we found that 65% of banners shelved at least one refrigerated plant-based meat product in the meat aisle. 91% of retailers used recommended integrated or integrated segregated merchandising in multiple categories beyond plant-based milk. Also, 57% of the retailers used aisle signage to identify plant-based products, and of those, about a third of them used the recommended language. So there's still room for growth in signage. Especially with COVID, we're seeing a meteoric rise in grocery e-commerce. Because the digital path to purchase is so distinct from that in brick and mortar stores, it's critical to build multiple entry points for the plant-based consumer journey. The key similarity is that featuring plant-based products alongside their conventional counterparts allows customers to shop their go-to section and compare products. Key strategies for e-commerce merchandising include offering plant-based products in conventional search results and category listings, like plant-based chicken nuggets when customers either search chicken or click into the poultry section. It's important to minimize clicks and to cross-list categories under all relevant departments, such as meat, dairy, and even produce, as customers may look for products in different sections and square footage is much less expensive online. And lastly, while we recommend using plant-based and plant protein language in menu labels, we recommend comprehensive product tagging and attribution that includes all relevant terms like plant-based, vegan, vegetarian, and meatless to improve search results and filterability and capture all potential sales. And here's an example from King Soopers, which uses menu subcategories under the conventional category, for example, plant-based meat in the meat department and milk and plant-based milk under the dairy department. For marketing, our top recommendations are to 1, create cross-category thematic plant-based promotions. 2, market around taste by upping the indulgence factor and featuring tasty plant-based options as alternatives to animal-based options. 3, appeal to more customers by using those inclusive terms, plant-based and plant protein, instead of restrictive terms such as vegan or meatless. And 4, leverage existing wellness and nutrition programs as well as seasonal campaigns and offer in-store demo opportunities to increase category exposure. We found that 78% of retailers had at least one plant-based category promotion or marketing event. 39% of retailers featured plant-based products next to conventional products in promos like a summer grilling ad or a flyer on Thanksgiving meal planning. And 65% of retailers used the recommended language in marketing materials. Sprouts ran a multi-brand cross-channel marketing campaign with plant-based tastes great messaging, which uses digital, print, and in-store channels from email campaigns to the weekly flyer to store signage to emphasize that plant-based products are tasty, indulgent, and satisfying. Aldi dedicated a section of its flyer to promoting its private label plant-based products, and Whole Foods' website and social media channels offered plant-based eating guides, recipes, and wellness content. Whole Foods won the award for the best social media content with more than 50 unique pieces throughout the year. Retailer magazines can also be effective at serving up food and lifestyle content that customers look to for inspiration in the kitchen. Kroger's Live Naturally magazine routinely has features on plant-based meat, egg, and dairy recipes, as well as cooking tips and wellness and nutrition guidance. And Savory magazine from Ahold Delhaize has a regular plant-powered feature about plant-forward twists on familiar dishes to appeal to the omnivore consumer. So to sum it up, the first of its kind Good Food Retail Report paints a promising picture for growing total store sales by improving plant-based strategies across product assortment, merchandising, and marketing. Retailers can offer a diversity of protein types, formats, flavors, and price points across plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy, and to develop compelling private label lines. They can deploy integrated segregated merchandising to capture the majority of consumers and appeal to taste to promote plant-based at a cross-category level. These practices are becoming best practices, and retailers that are positioning themselves to win at plant-based are positioning themselves to win with both today's consumer and the consumer of the future. Thank you, and I'll pass it on to Parker Brody to discuss plant-based insights from Whole Foods Market.
Hey everyone, this is Parker Brody with Whole Foods Market. Thanks for joining us today. I want to just start by appreciating the Good Foods Institute for including us in this, and for all those involved in promoting us to win a few of the different awards, including Best Overall Product Assortment and Best Social Media Content, among a couple of others. So really excited to be here talking about a few of these things. And we'll just get started. So I thought I'd start here with a quick overview of plant-based consumers, what they mean to Whole Foods, and how we interact. So just to start by saying, for 40 years now, Whole Foods Market has been the destination for both vegetarians and vegans to shop. We take a lot of pride in providing our customers with an abundant offering of plant-based products, including novel proteins that we see today, both and additionally made with wholesome ingredients. So it's no secret to anybody, and as Caroline and Emma just covered, there's a significant amount of growth happening here across all categories. We're seeing categories that have existed for centuries, essentially, in plant-based milk that are now evolving to be large portions of the total business in dairy. And likewise, we're seeing new categories popping up with plant-based alternatives to animal derivatives. Essentially every year, we see more and more coming into our different presentations, which is great to see, and really seeing, as they mentioned earlier, that large bit of capital that's being pushed into this space, really seeing that come to fruition across a lot of different categories. So one thing that we see a lot of in our stores, both within the grocery and packaged goods department and really across the whole store, is that consumers are really buying across both plant-based and animal derivatives. And so we're seeing sort of a hybrid model where people are really looking to satisfy a lot of different parts of their diet, and they're not looking to a one-stop shop to make that happen. So great example of this, and sort of the anecdotal piece of information we're fed a lot right now, is how many consumers are buying plant-based milk and dairy milk both in the same cart. So they may have consumers in their household who either prefer not to consume dairy, or have a dairy intolerance or something of the sort. And so that household member might consume an almond milk or an oat milk, where some of the other members of the family may use dairy milk, or maybe dairy milk is preferred for baking options. But at the end of the day, we're seeing a lot of baskets built right now where there is a large cross-section of those items in the cart. So really attributes to consumers wanting to venture into both sides of the business, not eliminating animal byproducts from their diet necessarily, but maybe being more conscientious of their consumption, or trying to eliminate certain parts of that from their diet. One thing that we mentioned earlier in this presentation was the different types of merchandising. And at Whole Foods Market, and I'll give specific examples within the dairy section, which is the part of the store that I'm a co-manager of with several other category merchants. So we really subscribe to a couple different merchandising techniques that we just discussed a few minutes ago. So I'll start with an integrated model, which we do have in our yogurt sets within the dairy department. So within yogurt, there's obviously a number of different things that go into consumer decisions. You have different options from Greek to other strains, skiers, traditional yogurts, and then now over the past decade or so, we've seen a large influx of plant-based options, and those within themselves have a number of different base types, whether it's soy or almond or oat, or others that we're seeing come in every day. But nevertheless, that set or assortment is all merchandised in one unified location. And so when consumers go shop that set, they're looking for yogurt, and then within that, they can decide whether they want to buy plant-based options or a Greek strain or a different type of yogurt that we have today. And then some integrated, segregated models, which is a little more common for us. A great example is milk, dairy milk versus plant-based milk. So those two sets both live within our dairy section. In most cases, they're merchandised adjacent to one another. However, plant-based milk does reside on its own, and it is its designated section. And then dairy milk is, as it's always been, its designated section. So the idea here is that we give those consumers who are looking to cross-shop the opportunity to put both in their basket easily, but we do segment them so that there is less confusion and a quicker decision for somebody who might not have to decide, and they're just going to shop plant-based or they're just going to shop dairy. But that approach works well for us in that particular area. And then some other areas that we do have that are integrated as of today, as was mentioned earlier, eggs, which is still a relatively small segment as it relates to plant-based, that is merchandised in with our egg sets. And then milk products, we do have an assortment of both plant-based and dairy-based items within that particular set. All of this is merchandised in our dairy section, which is our refrigerated section in the store. So whether it is integrated or integrated segregated, they do reside in that section together. And then, one more piece there. The importance of plant-based options to our consumer, one thing that is becoming more and more evident these days is how important plant-based has become as an attribute. And I think when you look at the high-level view of where the current landscape is versus where we saw things in the 80s around organics, there's a pretty strong correlation, albeit anecdotal, to organic and its expectation for products having a conventional option and an organic option. Fast forwarding to today, where you really do have this desire of consumers to have the everyday animal derivative option and then a plant-based option that emulates those attributes as well. And now we can move forward. So I think as we get into more product specifics, it's as I mentioned, been quite fascinating to see something that in the 13th and 14th centuries, when plant milks were first recorded and the first ever almond milk recipe was developed in the 13th century, that we now get to the early 2000s, where you have products like Beyond Burger, Impossible Burger, and some others that have come out in the last few years that have really put a hyperspeed on the way that we think about plant-based alternatives. And I think the category growth has been exponential over the last few years as a result of consumer awareness, as well as financial investments that have been put into these categories. So in the 1920s in the US, that was essentially when plant-based milk began. And now plant-based milk is growing to be quite a large portion of the entire milk segment within this country, well over 10% nationally across all channels. So exciting to see, very notable how fast it's accelerated over the last few years. I think consumer expectations here, as I mentioned a minute ago, there really is this desire for a plant-based alternative to everything that they're used to buying on an everyday basis. So whether it is simply an ingredient or it is the entire product, there's this desire for plant-based to be an option. But among that, taste and actual performance of the product as it relates to look and feel of the item that it's emulating is of the utmost importance. So not only do customers expect there to be a plant-based alternative, but they expect it to taste and perform exactly like the animal equivalent that they are used to having. And that is becoming increasingly difficult within the space, but I think that a number of brands have stepped up over the last few years and really put products out there that are satisfying both of those needs. And then, one thing that we really see across the plant-based segments, whether it's plant-based proteins or plant-based milks, or just plant-based alternatives within, cereals and breakfast products and other things in the store, is there is this cross-section of why people are buying it. There's people who are buying it for health reasons, people who are buying it for environmental sustainability, or at least the perception of that. And then, the more historical reason of animal welfare and protecting animal rights and more of the standard vegan mentality. And consumers, I would say, very, very frequently cross through one, two, or all three of these among several others. And so there really isn't this one big reason. It's really attributed to more of a tipping point of several pieces of global culture coming to a head right now. And I think it's really been the core reasons behind it all, but there's not one silver bullet as to why. And so as we think towards the future, white spaces, what opportunities exist out there, I kind of think of this anecdote of invention versus innovation. And being someone who is in a position to see, virtually every product that someone can come up with and vetting those to determine, what's viable in the space and what maybe isn't ready yet or is too advanced for what people are looking for. I think of invention versus innovation. And I think to give context to that, it's simply that, to me, invention is the idea that someone can come up with something new that nobody's ever seen before. They can get a patent on it, prove that they came up with it first. But innovation is really where the future of this category exists. And it's this simple idea of how do you convey this new thing that people have created and give people a desire and feel the need to buy it. And I think a great example of that over the last couple of years is oat milk, where oat milk was something that essentially didn't exist in the United States until 3 or 4 years ago, and now is rapidly growing to be roughly a fifth or more of the entire plant-based milk category. And oat milk is, something that's new and inventive, the same as modern day coconut milks or cashew milks or other things. But there was this need created where people saw how they could use oat milk in their everyday life. They could put it in their coffee, they could put it in their baking mixes. And it's this creation of a need state for consumers so that they understand how to take something that's new and use it in their everyday life. And so that's a broad stroke statement, but something I challenge suppliers to think about is, virtually anybody can come up with an idea, but how do you convince consumers that they need it and that it's going to be beneficial either to them directly or to them by way of helping the environment or helping social causes, et cetera. And I think when we think about that at Whole Foods Market, it comes down to this obsession with our customer and making sure that highlighting plant-based foods is just one of the many ways that we listen to and connect with our customers. It's this idea that our consumer is evolving what their expectations are, and so we want to evolve with them. So never letting go of who we are or where we've come from, but making sure that if consumers have these evolving expectations of plant-based alternatives and plant-based diets, that we're finding the highest quality and best performing items for them to include in their everyday diets. And then that leads to this last simple piece around the future of food technology, where we're heading. We have such a high degree of scientific capabilities now where we're able to really put a lot of scientific research and study into creating the highest quality foods out there. And it will become even more ever present that our quality standards at Whole Foods Market, but in general, quality standards to foods will become increasingly more important as new novel proteins and novel ingredients become the forefront of these new developments. And so I'm very excited with where we're headed as a society with food. I think that there's a lot of great thinking and a lot of good investments going on here. And so all in all, I think we are very excited at Whole Foods Market to see where this trend continues. And so with that, I will kick it over to Kyle.
Great, thank you so much, Parker. Earlier in the webinar, Caroline presented retail market data for the full calendar year 2019. And I'll now discuss how COVID-19 has affected the plant-based meat, plant-based dairy categories for the first half of 2020. To start, plant-based meat has experienced strong growth despite the disruption caused by COVID-19. This chart displays plant-based meat dollar and volume retail sales growth versus the same weeks in the prior year. Prior to the pantry stocking period in late March, plant-based meat dollar growth was up 44% versus the same week in the prior year. And dollar sales growth massively increased to 152% versus the prior year at the peak of the pantry stocking period, and then remained strong over the course of the summer, with week-by-week growth ranging from 43% to 79% versus the prior year from April through July. So how does plant-based meat sales growth compare to animal-based meat sales growth? While both plant-based and animal-based meat have performed well during COVID, plant-based meat has consistently outperformed animal-based meat dollar sales growth. This graph compares plant-based and animal-based meat retail dollar sales growth versus the same weeks in the prior year. We can see that during that same pantry stocking period bump in March, plant-based meat sales growth versus the same week in 2019 was nearly double that of animal-based meat. Plant-based meat sales growth continued to outperform animal-based meat sales growth through May. This comparison is even more stark when we compare fresh plant-based meat to fresh animal-based meat. Fresh plant-based meat sales growth hit a high of 454% versus the same week in 2019 during the pantry stocking period, compared to fresh animal-based meat sales growth of 100% versus the same week in 2019. Fresh plant-based meat maintained a strong week-by-week growth versus the prior year, ranging from a low of 164% to a high of 228% growth from April through June. By comparison, fresh animal-based meat sales growth versus the prior year stayed in the double digits. It's worth noting that fresh plant-based meat's strong performance during COVID matches a similar dynamic we saw prior to COVID, where refrigerated plant-based meat was the driver of the overall category, growing at a rate of 63% over the course of 2019 versus frozen plant-based meat's growth of only 4%. Plant-based milk has also performed well during COVID-19. Analysis by Cargill and Euromonitor predicts plant-based milk will grow by 9% over the course of 2020. By comparison, animal-based milk is forecasted to decrease by 5% over the same time period. Over the 15-year period from 2005 to 2020, animal-based milk's market size is projected to decline by 1.5%, while plant-based milk's market size has increased by nearly 7%. Data previously released by GFI shows that oat milk was the highest performing plant-based milk type in 2019, growing at a massive 686% over the course of the year. Oat milk has performed similarly well during COVID, with its dollar sales growth massively outperforming animal-based milk dollar sales growth. During the pantry stocking period, oat milk hit a high of 513% growth versus the same week in 2019, compared to animal-based milk's high of 53% growth versus the same week in the prior year. Oat milk's strong performance carried forward through the summer, with rates higher than 200% for the same weeks in the prior year at the beginning and end of June. By comparison, animal-based milk growth rates versus the same weeks in the prior year hovered in the single digits. Plant-based meat companies performed well during the initial months of the pandemic, with brands like Morningstar, Gardein, and Tofurky reporting increased sales and increased proportions of first-time buyers. Tofurky reported a sales increase of 40% from February through April, while Morningstar and Gardein reported March sales increases of 66% and 65%, respectively. Gardein reports that 38% of these buyers were first-time customers. Brands like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods have also performed well. Impossible responded to COVID's disruption of food service by rapidly shifting attention to retail. In early May, Impossible added almost 800 locations across the country and continued expanding its retail presence over the course of July and August. Impossible products are now available in more than 9,000 retail stores nationwide. Beyond Meat has also reported strong performance during COVID, with retail sales increasing more than 190% over the course of Q2 2020. Beyond reported in its Q2 earnings call that 4.9% of U.S. households tried Beyond Meat products by the end of June, up from 3.5% in January. Additionally, 50% of those who bought Beyond products bought them again, up from 45% in January. In other words, not only are more people trying Beyond products, a larger percentage of those people are purchasing again as well. Investment in plant-based companies has also remained strong. Rebellious, Impossible, Plantable, and Live Kindly Collective raised $741 million in venture capital funding in Q1 2020, which is more venture investment capital than was raised in all of 2019. From January through August 2020, $1.3 billion in venture capital funding was raised in the plant-based industry, more than double what was raised in 2019. Now that we've covered COVID-19's effects on the plant-based market, let's take a look at how it has influenced consumer perceptions and motivations. As can be expected, health concerns are top of mind for consumers right now. Half of consumers report being concerned about a lack of activity due to shelter-in-place orders, and a third are concerned about their mental health. Almost half plan to purchase more health-related items, and almost a third are already purchasing more health-related items. This is important due to the perceived health halo that surrounds plant-based foods. A quarter of consumers report that they are less likely to buy animal-based meat due to concerns around COVID-19 in meatpacking facilities. Gen Z and millennials report being less likely to buy animal-based meat at higher rates than all generations combined, at 41% and 37% respectively. In addition to consumers reporting they will be less likely to purchase animal-based meat, almost a quarter of consumers report eating more plant-based meals as a result of COVID-19. Once again, younger consumers report eating more plant-based meals at higher rates than all generations together, with 29% of 18 to 24-year-olds reporting eating more plant-based meals. Finally, of current plant-based meat buyers, almost 20% report purchasing plant-based meat for the first time during COVID-19. Of this percentage, an impressive 92% report they are likely to continue purchasing plant-based meat. This data highlights that plant-based meat is a permanent fixture in the market. Not only has COVID-19 resulted in more consumers trying plant-based meat, nearly all of these consumers are satisfied with plant-based meat and are likely to maintain their purchasing. And with that, I would like to hand it back to Caroline Bushnell, who will moderate the Q&A for this webinar.
Thank you, Kyle, and everyone. Okay, so we have about 20 open questions and about 15 minutes left. So we'll do our best to get to all the questions. Feel free to keep them coming though. So the first question I have here, which I'll hand over to Emma to start, would be what are the most, and then Brody would, or Parker would love your opinion on this as well. What are the most important qualities for a plant-based product to achieve?
Thanks, Caroline, and that's a great question. Above all, we really recommend focusing on taste. So again, GFI and MindLab conducted a study on implicit perceptions of the plant-based category, and we found that taste is the #1 motivator of purchase intent for plant-based foods, followed by familiarity and tradition, and freshness, which are also strong correlators. And then farther down the line, health and nutrition, price, and then lastly, altruistic benefits and specific nutritional claims. And all of these had positive effects, but taste was #1. And we at GFI think that some of the biggest opportunities in product features can really be summed up with the quick trifecta of taste, price, and convenience. Parker, is there anything you might want to add about what qualities are important and you look for in a plant-based product?
I wouldn't add too much. I think in the interest of time, everything you said was dead on. I do think as we move forward in the future, there has to be an evolution to being very health-centric. I think that's probably the only marquee addition I would add as we look towards the far future, not necessarily this year or next, but I think that's going to become increasingly important.
Thanks. And Parker, while we're on this topic, there's a question for you. Are you trying to intentionally target consumer values, for example, health, sustainability, animal welfare, in your marketing of plant-based foods, or are you just working the taste and performance end of it?
I don't know that I'm the right person to answer that from a marketing perspective. I think from an assortment perspective, I am absolutely focusing on satisfying different purchase occasions or need states, and those attributes that you just listed would be a part of that.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next question we have here was, could you talk a little more about good examples of best practices from retailers? Emma, would you add anything on that?
Sure. So I think one area where there is a lot of action is in merchandising and in particular signage. So several retailers have really good implementations of shelf tags. We saw a lot of, like leaf icons indicating plant-based. We saw door signage in the frozen section promoting private label plant-based meal prep items. We saw cross-category floor vinyl applications promoting plant-based and a variety of aisle signage approaches, whether it's, hanging at the end of the aisle or a gondola signage branching over different aisle sections promoting plant-based. And for marketing and social media, retailers like Whole Foods are really leveraging influencers in the food world to elevate plant-based stories and cooking ideas. On social media, cart photos are really huge and often do a really nice job of layering different brands and private label products to really showcase the diversity of the available plant-based portfolio. And then I'll also add that recipe areas on retailer websites have become quite sophisticated. Some include plant-based attribution and tagging, and also some have really easy product swap outs that transform a recipe that uses animal-based ingredients into one that is fully plant-based.
Thanks, Emma. The next question we have here, which I'll give to Kyle to start, and then Parker, if you'd like to add on. I know you talked about this a bit in your presentation, but someone's asking, what are the biggest white spaces in product development?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? You broke up a little bit.
Yes, what are the biggest white spaces in product development?
Of course. So far what we've seen on the market are a lot of plant-based burger products, for example, or plant-based grounds. And so looking forward, we think that there's a considerable white space opportunity in areas like plant-based seafood, as well as plant-based whole muscle products, which more closely mimic animal-based meat products like steak. These are areas that there aren't necessarily any products in right now, but we're confident that companies are looking into sort of as the next area of innovation on the plant-based product end. Yes, that's what I would note there, and then I'll hand it over to Parker just in case he has any additional commentary.
I think that there is an endless amount of answers to that. It goes back to what I was referring to with invention versus innovation. I think it's one of those things that at Whole Foods Market, we're looking for true innovations, category disruptors. And so maybe not looking for the next iteration of a plant-based burger necessarily, but what are other critical areas of animal alternatives that we would see a large benefit from consumers purchasing, whether it's environmentally, health, or something along those lines.
Thanks, Parker. We have a question for you, Parker. Was just at a Whole Foods and found a restaurant called Plant. It was totally plant-based. I know this isn't necessarily your area, Parker, but I don't know if you can speak to it all. Is that a Whole Foods restaurant brand that will be expanding?
It is not my area of expertise for sure, but I can tell you that Plant, PLNT, is a Friends of Whole Foods store within a store, and we have several different iterations of things like that in a lot of our stores.
Great, thank you. Next question here for Emma. Do retailers require plant-based food manufacturers to bear or share the costs of trade marketing, flyers, store magazines, et cetera, to promote plant-based foods and lifestyles?
Thank you. Yes, there are a lot of opportunities for brands to help cover the costs of promotions and marketing. And what we recommend to retailers is that they make available more opportunities to feature plant-based cross-category, whether that's digital or in print. Aligning that with the marketing calendar for the year at a given retailer, focusing on new year, new you, adding plant-based opportunities in that, and also during holiday seasons like Thanksgiving or grilling over the summer. Those are all really good opportunities for retailers to sort of create moments where plant-based brands can engage in marketing and promotions that really sort of come together to elevate the category as a whole.
Thanks, Emma. This next question for Parker. Can you describe what role food brokers have helped play in the growth of plant-based foods and grocery retailers? And then there's a couple parts here. Are food buyers increasingly open and aware of replacing animal-based foods with plant-based foods? And what about margins? Are food buyers building in lower margin but expecting better volumes?
So several questions there. I think to answer that in the best way possible, Food brokers will always play a role in just total grocery sales, and I think they are typically very in tune with trends. And although plant-based foods has been more of what I would describe as a movement, nevertheless it's a trend. And so yes, I would say they're playing a large role in that. And then I think that probably translates directly just into awareness. At Whole Foods Market, we've been the leader in this space for a long time. It's always been a large part of what we buy and what we stand for. It's in the name. And so that's a little harder for me to answer, because I think there's always been, not always, but there's for a long time been a sense of awareness here on that. And then as it relates to margins, I don't know that I understand that enough to answer it. I think, if we're talking about pricing with, plant-based foods and animal byproducts, the goal of those plant-based brands is that one day they are able to price parity with the animal byproducts that they're emulating, but there's a cost associated with that, and it is not something that they're able to do quite yet. But that is absolutely the ultimate goal of all of these brands, is that they are able to make it so that price isn't a disparity, and that it truly is consumers getting to choose whether they want the animal version or the plant-based version.
Great, thank you. We've got another one for you, Parker. What is going to drive the remaining 59% of consumers to purchase plant-based milk, for example? What might be the reason they haven't made the transition? Are there things current options aren't delivering on? Or is it just is there still room for innovation, or is it just a matter of time and increased awareness?
I think that ultimately the answer to that is, our goal is to just give consumers the choice. So I think always and forever, there will be a reason and a customer who wants to buy dairy milk. And I think that the plant-based consumer has grown simply because of assortment and awareness. But I think that the goal is to give consumers the best choices that they can make for themselves.
Sure. I'll add a little on to that one, because I think to the question is if there's still room for innovation in the category. I think there is. There are a ton of great plant-based milk options out there with a variety of ingredients and a variety of nutritional profiles. Overwhelmingly, a lot of them don't necessarily match the protein content of conventional dairy milk. So that's certainly an opportunity to meet or exceed the protein and nutritional content of dairy options. And while they taste great, there might not be options on the market today that really taste exactly the same as conventional cow's milk, which certainly having that type of analogousness in the product is going to bring more consumers into the category. I would also say that there is a matter of just time, familiarity, and awareness, right? If you think about the diffusion of innovation curve, we're definitely kind of in the early mainstream, but that late mainstream and laggards are still an opportunity. And there might be a smaller niche of consumers who don't kind of ever transition over to plant-based milk. But I think it's a combination of the things from that question. Okay, let's see. Are there other categories that have proven out integrated, segregated merchandising? Emma, would you like to take that?
Sure. And the answer is yes, absolutely. And one of the categories that we've seen that in is natural and organics. So this framework of prioritizing integrated, segregated merchandising over a segregated strategy is really borrowed from the natural and organic category, which has seen substantial gains over the past couple decades. And having that one natural section is really important when retailers are trying to communicate to customers that they have a critical mass of natural products. But as the trend has grown and become more mainstream, those items have moved more and more into the main sets. And as Caroline sort of alluded to earlier, as a developed plant-based category, we see this with refrigerated milk and plant-based. So about 15 years ago, consumers had to search the aisles to find shelf-stable selections of plant-based milk. But today you can find plant-based milk right in the milk aisle alongside conventional cow's milk. And this merchandising change really helped plant-based milk increase from 1% share of the total milk category to 14% today. And now about 90% of plant-based milk sales are from the refrigerated case.
Thanks, Emma. And on that topic, could you talk a little bit more about the Kroger and PBFA merchandising test?
Sure. So Kroger, in collaboration with the Plant-Based Foods Association, performed this study on merchandising plant-based meat in the meat department. And the study ran just last December through February at about 60 test stores. And it placed plant-based meats in a dedicated 3-foot set within Kroger's meat department. And across the test stores, as I said before, plant-based meat sales increased an average of 23% compared to the control group. And the study was performed in 2 main regions, in the Midwest and in Denver, Colorado. And in Denver, sales increased 13%, which is substantial despite already having a really high concentration of plant-based consumers. And then in the Midwest region, where more flexitarians are emerging, sales increased by 32%. Also in the Midwest region, shoppers increased their number of purchase occasions by 34%. The test set attracted 32% more new shoppers to the category than in the control group. And then shoppers also, who were purchasing a wider variety of plant-based meat, increased by 33%. And the Plant-Based Foods Association has an excellent post and more details on their website. And what Kroger said in summation is that, the study really offers another proof point that plant-based meat has really moved from niche to mainstream.
Thanks, Emma. Question here, if we have any data on how retail pricing on consumer willingness to pay more for plant-based products versus conventional products. Kyle, maybe you could share if there's any data you're aware of that we have on that. And then Parker, I don't know if you have any observations on kind of price elasticity for plant-based products as well.
Off the top of my head, I don't believe we have data specific to price elasticity or consumer willingness to pay. Apart from, we just generally believe that plant-based products need to hit price parity with animal-based products to really start taking market share. So as I mentioned in one of the responses in the Q&A earlier, we see examples of plant-based meat companies looking to drop the prices of their products already, like Beyond's value packs they released over the summer, which dropped the price per patty to lower than it had been previously. So that's just to say that it is an area that's important and that companies are looking at. But I'll pass it over to Parker to see if he has more specific information on that question.
No, I think without specifics, it's evident that consumers are willing to pay that right now because of the sales trends we see in the category. I think as with anything over time, it's going to compress as competition and consumers dictate that behavior. But the rapid growth in plant-based sales is directly attributed to consumer willingness to pay. So,
yeah, I would agree with that and add, that we do know that for vegan and vegetarian consumers, they are certainly willing to pay much more due to a specific product need. But as the products become increasingly mainstream, and we're bringing in the mass market, that's where getting closer to price parity is going to be increasingly important. But so far, those consumers are also showing a willingness to pay quite a bit more. Okay. So we are at time. I still have about 26 open questions. So I think what we'll do is we'll officially wrap it up now. And for anyone who wants to kind of wait and see, we'll go ahead and get some answers typed up in the Q&A. You're also welcome to email us directly at I think it is on the last slide, which I am not on. So I will just give you all my email address, which is carolineb@gfi.org. Please feel free, if we didn't get to any of your questions, email me and we'll spend a little time in the chat here and try and get them. So thank you all for joining. I hope you found this informative. Parker, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to Emma and Kyle as well.
Thanks for having me.